come from a applied linguistics background, and I got my master's thesis is actually about translation studies, and then for my PhD, that again is about translation studies. Particularly for my PhD, I focused on assessment of translation and interpreting quality. So I hope tonight I can share some ideas with you about how I see the quality of a translation or an interpreting assignment can be assessed. So basically, what I want in particular, it's about pragmatic functions or pragmatic meanings. So here is my slide. Well, that's the topic. It makes sense, but I just don't get it. Well, why I got this topic? Because um, in my PhD study, I feel that the Chinese immigrants participating in my study, uh, they often felt that they did they did get the messages, but they still didn't know what they actually have to do with the messages. So that's how I came up with this topic. So tonight I want to talk about some consideration of pragmatic functions when we do translation or interpreting. So first of all, let's look at pragmatic meanings versus semantic meanings. I want to ask you a question first. How do you greet people in your first language? And then think about the literal meaning of the expression. For example, when we greet in Chinese, in Mandarin Chinese, we say 你好, and the literal meaning of 你好 is you good. But of course, when we say 你好, we don't mean to say you are good, you good. We mean to say hello. So once the function of saying 你好, which is to greet people, is achieved, then we can say that expression has achieved the pragmatic function of that particular expression. And this particular pragmatic function or meaning cannot be achieved if we simply focus on the semantic meaning or the literal meaning of the expressions. So that's what I want to focus on today. So and when we use that idea to look at translation and interpreting quality, then what I mean by good quality, I actually mean this. This is an example from my PhD study. For which I look at a particular text, and for which I define good quality translation as a translation that can achieve pragmatic equivalence. So what do I mean by achieving pragmatic equivalence? I mean the translation should maintain the pragmatic functions of the original text. And in my PhD study, as an example, the original texts were health texts, such as healthcare pamphlets that we get from at GP or at hospitals. And the pragmatic functions of those texts are to inform or to persuade the reader to take actions or not to take actions and regarding to their health conditions. So by good quality health translation, I mean the translation maintains the original informative and the persuasive effects. And when the effects have been achieved, maintained, then I can say the translation is pragmatically equivalent to the original text. So then how do we assess whether a translation is pragmatically equivalent to the original text? Well, I actually have developed a set of assessment criteria. Here it is. Well, this set of criteria is based on Eugene Nida's idea, but dynamic equivalence, as you can see here, dynamic equivalence. And a dynamic equivalence translation needs to have at least 4 elements. The translation needs to sound natural. Well, when we say a translation sound natural, that means the translation sound natural to the native speaker of the target language and makes sense. When the translation makes sense, the reader can perceive, can understand the messages delivered through the translation without difficulties. In original manner, this one is a bit of is a bit unclear. What I see with original manner this element actually means the original pragmatic function. For example, whether the original text is to inform or to be sarcastic or to be persuasive. So that's the original manner, and a translation should be able to maintain that original manner. And then the last one, similar response. This one means the translation can elicit a similar response as the original text would elicit among the reader of the original text. So if the reader of the original text feels that they are being persuaded to, for example, someone who has diabetes, and after they have read a text, they feel that, oh, they shouldn't eat too much rice, for example, then that response should be elicited through the translation as well. So this is the full elements or full functions that a dynamic equivalence translation should achieve. And when I look at this full, I actually came up with 7 potential outcomes of how a translation can be assessed. And here I mean translation quality. So let's look at this example. You can see the picture on the left at the top. And I need you to look at the sentence. Please use the crater rim track. And the Chinese translation of this English sentence is 城石油火山口边缘的轨道. Well, when we look at this as a native Chinese speakers, when I look at that translation, I feel, well, that seems fine. It sounds natural. It sounds natural, so that's why I take sounds natural. And it makes sense, yes, because it's grammatical. Yeah, so it makes sense. But when I was standing next to the crater in Auckland, Mount Eden, Auckland, it doesn't make sense at all, because as you can see the picture on the right here, there's no railway track, because 轨道 actually means railway track. So then, when I'm in this situation where this sign is actually placed, then this translation doesn't make sense to me. Then, of course, when it doesn't make sense to me, so the original manner of being informative, telling people to use the track, is lost. That manner, that informative function is lost. So the reader, for example, me, did not feel the way that the English sentence would expect the reader to react, to respond, which is to use the track. So basically, when I see these 4 elements, I see that there is a correlative relationship among them. When a translation sounds natural, it is possible to make sense. When it makes sense, it is possible to maintain the original manner. When it maintains the original manner, then it is possible to elicit a similar response. When one of them is failed, it's very possible not to elicit a similar response. Then therefore, the translation fails pragmatic equivalence. So that's actually how I use this set of assessment criteria. And if this translation, this Chinese translation, is an assignment, then the way I assess it, the quality I'll assess it would be MSOMSRF. That means Makes sense is failed, original manner is failed, and a similar response is failed. In other words, the translation sounds natural. That's it, but it doesn't mean anything else. So this is the assessment criteria that I used in my PhD study, where I recruited a total of 30 participants. 15 of them were Chinese language translators, mostly based in Auckland, and the other group of 15 participants were Chinese immigrants. They came to New Zealand through the chain migration. That means they followed their adult children. So I asked them to use this set of assessment criteria to assess 15 Chinese translation of healthcare texts. The translations were the, for example, healthcare pamphlets that I collected at GP, at Auckland hospitals, and also some texts were from websites such as the website of Health, Ministry of Health. So I asked them to assess the translation quality, and then the results were quite interesting, and that again helped me. That again made me feel that it's really important to share with people how important it is to achieve pragmatic equivalence. Anyway, please look at this table. The seven potential possible assessment outcomes in the square. You can see the 7 are put in the square here, and you can see it seems that my assessment criteria, this set of assessment criteria, is consistent with the Chinese immigrants' perspectives in terms of what characterizes good quality translation. Why is that? Why I feel that way? Because as long as the possible outcome, the assessment outcome is not within this square, shows mostly 0%. So that's the first thing. And then the other thing that I noticed is when most passages, translated passages, were assessed as total equivalence, that means the translation achieves the full criteria, the full requirements to achieve pragmatic equivalence. The professional translators assessed 58% of text as achieving total equivalence, but it's only 5.2% by the Chinese immigrants. And the highest outcome with the highest percentage in the Chinese immigrants assessment result was 44%. And in contrast, is 0.38% in the translators assessment result. And when it comes to totally lost, that means the translation doesn't sound natural, doesn't make sense, doesn't maintain the original manner, it doesn't elicit a similar response. Well, the Chinese immigrants assessed 21% of the passages with this assessment outcome, but only 4.8 in the professional translators assessment outcome. So it actually shows a very quite conflicting opinions between the translators and the Chinese immigrants. Well, we will have to bear in mind that Chinese immigrants are the real user of translations. One other thing that is also interesting for me is the assessment outcome SNF. That means the translation doesn't sound natural, but it makes sense. And it maintains the original manner in terms of, for example, in terms of being informative and persuasive. And the translation can elicit a similar response. So even though the translation doesn't sound natural at all. Well, the professional translators assessed 21% of the text with this outcome, but the Chinese immigrants assigned this outcome to nothing. none of the passage was signed with this outcome. Well, I have to point it out that it doesn't mean that the Chinese immigrants felt all the passages sounded natural to them. It could mean that once a translation did not sound natural, then the translation eventually failed all other three criteria, and that explains why other outcomes were shown higher percentages. And this outcome SNF is actually against my argument of seeing sounds natural as the fundamental factor of achieving pragmatic equivalence. So this is quite interesting. So I decided to look at the passages assigned with total equivalence SRF and SNF. And I also asked the translators to participate an online survey, and here are some of their responses. Strictly faithful to original text, being loyal to the source language, good quality should convey the same messages, and without accuracy, the meaning would be lost. I agree with all of them, and I feel that their response actually is consistent with the NZSTI Code of Ethics accuracy. Well, so accuracy actually covers two aspects: content and intent. So I used the framework of systemic functional linguistics to explain the translator's assessment results, and I realized that it seems that the translators mostly focus on ideational meanings. Well, ideational meanings means, well, to put it in plain language, the literal meaning, the semantic meanings of a word. When they say a car, it's just a car. When they say persuade, it's just persuade. When they say please, it's just please. And then they seem not to be aware of textual meanings. By textual meanings, actually, it means the text, the expression has a function to persuade people. For example, to persuade people to take actions, or to inform people in the polite way, without sounding authoritative, for example. And interpersonal meanings, well, the text should make the reader realize that actually it's a text produced, for example, by the government office, or by a healthcare authority body, for example. And this text is aimed at the general public. So for me, it sounds like I feel that the translators focused mainly on the ideational meanings, and it's quite different from the perspectives that the Chinese immigrants adopted. They actually were very sensitive to the three meanings: ideational meaning, textual meaning, and interpersonal meaning. So that's actually a concern, because when we put too much focus on the meanings of words without actually putting more attention on the intent, for example, to persuade, to inform, and also to persuade with a suggestive tone, for example, that can actually make the target reader feel puzzled. They just don't get it. They get the messages, but they don't know what to do with the messages. And in my point of view, especially when it's about healthcare pamphlets, when they get the message but they still don't know what to do with the message that I have received, then this translation is a failure. Unfortunately, it's a failure, because the purpose is to ask people to do what they need to do, what they have to do. So here's one example from my PhD study, and in my other publications, let's look at this one. Well, in 2000 and in 2018, I did a study with Professor Ineke Crusay and Joanna Byrne at AUT, and we looked at student interpreters' performance, and the assignment was a semi-authentic court interpreting, and the scenario was a cross-examination. So at court, when it's about when lawyers are doing a cross-examination, well, usually they use a lot of tag questions. In English, tag questions, for example, you did it, didn't you? You like her, don't you? This kind of tag questions. And Sandra Held, another very important scholar in interpreting and translation studies, she actually came up with a taxonomy of English tag questions. So please look at this one. The first utterance, QC, Queen's Consulate. So if medical evidence is given by a medical specialist that all of these symptoms and what is being described is consistent with someone fainting and recovering from a faint, you wouldn't disagree with that, would you? The tone is falling at the end of this utterance. When we have a structure like this and with a tone like this, well, it actually delivers a stronger assumption. It expects to confirm the statement and challenges the listener. In other words, when the speaker uses this type of tag questions, the speaker actually knows the answer already. They just want to let you know that, hey, I know it, and I want you to say yes. So you don't lie to me. So basically, that's the pragmatic function of these kind of tag questions. And our study revealed that our student interpreters, I forgot to mention, we focused on Chinese language students. They seem to be aware of the structure of tag questions, and they did make the interpreting or translation of those tag questions into Chinese as a tag question, but there was something more serious. Let's look at this one. Here's another example. Here's an example that I gave in our publication. Let's just use these simple English questions. So weak to strong, that means the illocutionary intent or illocutionary force is weak or strong. By weak, I mean it doesn't make any assumption. It's simply a question seeking for an answer. When it's strong, there's a strong assumption that the speaker actually is trying to challenge the listener or trying to tell the listener that, hey, I know the answer. Don't you lie to me. So look at these English questions. Do you like her? You like her, isn't that right? You like her, don't you? You like her, don't you? And you like her, don't you? With a more aggressive falling tone. So we found that our student interpreters often used a structure that is parallel to the English tag questions. Because in Chinese, we do have tag questions, and we do have tag questions in terms of which the structure is parallel to an English tag questions, but the illocutionary intent can be very different. For example, when we have this one, 你喜欢他对不对? I know we have a number of Chinese speakers today. 你喜欢他对不对? 你喜欢他吧? 你喜欢他是不是? When we actually read it out, you can feel that the tone is different. That means the illocutionary force is different. So if we adopt a parallel structure to interpret or to translate an English tag question, the pragmatic function or the illocutionary intent can be altered in the Chinese translation. at court, that can be a serious problem. The lawyer is trying to be, maybe the lawyer is trying to be sarcastic, but it turns out that the Chinese interpreting is simply asking a question without delivering that sarcastic tone. So that's what I mean by it can be a serious problem. So now maybe you can think about in your language, in your working language, how you would translate the English tech questions here. And then maybe I tried it in my class. Students often found that they often can't use a parallel structure to translate the English tech questions. Otherwise the original illocutionary intent will be lost. So here again, I can point out the importance of achieving pragmatic equivalence in translation and in interpreting, because when we do that, it's actually achieving both cross-linguistic and cross-cultural communication. So we don't get stuck by words. We don't stuck by the literal meaning of words. And when we can achieve this, we actually can achieve what Martinson, that's another famous scholar, what he terms as the maximum equivalence, because that equivalence is at the level of context. We are not simply look at words or look at one particular sentence. We look at the context of where that sentence comes alive. So I also need to point out that if we look at cross-linguistic features, then that may lead to pragmolinguistic failures. That means the linguistic features, for example, sentence structure, may fail to achieve the expected pragmatic functions, like our previous example of English tech questions. So today I just want to share with you in when we do translation and interpreting, we really need to have a holistic perspective to look at the product. It's not just about messages. It's more than about messages. How we can maintain the original intent. That intent can be delivered through not just choice of words, but also structure, of course, also the tone in an utterance. So I'm not sure how much time I've taken for this speak, but that's what I want to share with you today. And if you are interested in the assessment criteria, please email me. That's my email, and I'll be very happy to share with you. I actually have another set of assessment criteria which can help point out a possible factor that leads to the failure of pragmatic equivalence. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Wei. That was very, very informative. If you don't mind, I would like to invite everyone to ask any particular burning questions they may have. And just while we wait perhaps for one or two of those to come through, I might jump in myself with the first question, if that's okay.
Yep.
So you talked about court interpreting. That's obviously a big part of many people's lives.
Yep.
And we often run into this argument that in court interpreting, I'm meant to be, as the interpreter, monotone, impartial, of course, and that I translate the words that one party says, the lawyer or the judge or the witness, and I'm not to guess the implied pragmatic or semantic intention behind the speaker's words. So in court interpreting, we run into this conflict of our instructions, often which are guided by a code of ethics as well. You have to be monotone, and you are just say the words that you hear, and we can't guess any implied meaning. And it's therefore the job of, say, the lawyer or the judge to hear our interpreted response,
Mm-hmm.
and then take those words, and then if they need to, ask a follow-up question to clarify meaning. How
Mm-hmm.
do you think and feel about that?
Actually, I always feel that the courts or the justice system and people in the people working with interpreters in justice system and also the lawyers, they have to be educated. It's very often we're asked to do verbatim in translation or interpreting word for word, but they have to know that it's often impossible because we all know why it's impossible. And I understand your concern, Aidan. Of course, we can't guess what the implying meanings or implying message or information that the lawyer or anyway the lawyers, for example, they're trying to deliver. But something is always in linguistic feature when we use a particular, for example, sentence structure to express ideas, there's always something attached to that structure. Let's just use tech questions. When I say you like pasta, don't you? When I ask a question like this, I I can't hear people. So, you like pasta, don't you? When I ask this question, actually, I'm not sure if you like pasta or not. So that's why I raise my tone at the end of the sentence. So that interpreters need to be aware of this pragmatic feature in this particular structure, then maintain that pragmatic feature in the saying in Chinese. So I'm not saying that I'm guessing, making any guess. I'm just maintaining the original intent, which is still to seek for an answer. Am I am I making myself clear?
Yep, there's
Yeah.
always built-in intents that are part of the structure of the language. Absolutely.
Yep. So that's why I say in the beginning, they need to be educated when they work with interpreters. They can't ask us to do word for word. No, we can't do that. I always stick to linguistic features.
Right.
Yeah, because
Right.
linguistic features can be more, I'm not saying absolutely objective, but it's more objective.
Right. Thank
Yeah,
you so much. Thank
no
you.
worries. My pleasure. No worries. Yep. It's term break now, so I'm very happy to answer questions.
Oh, it's getting paid for doing nothing. Is that what it
We're paid to do something, not nothing. It just we don't have to see students.
is? Don't look so happy about it.
Yeah, I can finally hide in my cave without seeing students. Yeah.
That's lovely. Okay, well, Wei, we're going to finish there for today's webinar.
Yep.
This is also being recorded. It will go up on the website and on the company's Facebook. So if you want to go back and visit and have another listen, as I'm sure many people will, it's definitely available there, probably by the end of the week.
Great.
So that's a wrap for today. Again, from my side, Wei, thank you very much for sharing all
Thank
of
you.
your knowledge.
And thank
And
you all for the comments and the questions. I look forward to seeing emails from you or please bombard me with questions. I'll be very happy to see them.
oh, that's so kind.